This episode is brought to you by Skillshare. The first 1,000 people to sign up using the link in the description will get their first 2 months free. Imagine you're doing some yard work on a Saturday afternoon and installing some fencing in your backyard. Suddenly, your neighbor shows up and claims that you installed the fence 6 inches too far into his property. Without warning, he tosses a glove at your feet and brandishes a mace, challenging you to a trial by combat to determine both of your property rights. Sound extreme? Well, for centuries, this was just the way most land disputes were settled across Europe. Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Infographics Show. Today, we're taking a look at trials by combat and asking, could you survive one? Ancient European courts had various and very imaginative ways of determining innocence or guilt in the absence of a witness. Trial by ordeal would see the accused undergo a difficult, painful, or perhaps life-threatening ordeal, with innocence proven if one could successfully complete the task given them. Trial by fire was much like it sounds, a way of determining guilt or innocence by having individuals brave roaring fires or carry red-hot metal rods a set number of paces. Lastly, though, is the infamous trial by combat, perhaps the most straightforward way of determining innocence or guilt between two parties. In all of these cases, it was believed that God himself would intervene on the innocent's behalf. Thus, failure or death was a sign of God's judgment. It seems people began to disagree as early as the 14th century, though, with the Emperor of the Holy Roman Empire declaring that innocent men were being convicted just for being physically weaker than their opponents. Yet, trials by combat remained in effect across Europe regardless for centuries. Having their origins from the customs of the wild Germanic tribes, their popularity grew as the Roman Empire declined, leaving a wild and lawless Europe in its wake. They would remain popular up until the 17th century, with some of the last recorded trials by combat taking place in Britain, though it wouldn't be until 1819 that they would be officially abolished by Attorney General Samuel Shepherd, who introduced the Trial by Battle Abolition Bill. In 2002, a 60-year-old man given a traffic violation in Britain officially challenged the British Driver and Vehicle Licensing Agency to a trial by combat to settle the matter, proposing that the DVLA appoint a champion to fight in their stead, and that the two would fight with samurai swords, Gurkha knives, or heavy hammers. The fine in question? £25, though the DMLV would go on to fine him an extra $200 with $100 in costs. But let's say we went back in time and you were summoned before the courts with your innocence to be determined by a trial by combat. What could you expect? Well, if the accusations against you were being levied by the state, the court might hire a freelance champion or simply appoint a volunteer prisoner sentenced to death to fight you. Prisoners who volunteered were often released after 5 successful trials by combat, though other times they were hanged anyways. Freelance champions were available not just to the courts, but to individuals as well, with some wealthy nobles keeping a champion on retainer the same way a lawyer might be kept on retainer by an individual or company today. Armaments to be used varied across Europe, but typically swords, maces, or quarterstaffs with sharpened metal points were provided for the combatants. In some places, though, purposefully awkward and unwieldy instruments such as iron rods curved into ram's horns were used. Customs varied, but typically the combatants were forced to shave their heads and sometimes allowed no armor whatsoever. In other places, they were allowed to wear only hardened leather armor with light gloves on the hands, but the head and legs below the knee must be exposed. In preparation for the trial by combat, a squire was assigned to each combatant, and these squires were responsible for the preparations for the event. A 60-foot square was prepared, and the combatants took oaths against the use of witchcraft or sorcery. Then, the trial would begin, typically at noon but sometimes at dawn. Typically, the trial required that one of the two combatants be dead or disabled, but in the cases of civil suits or charges of murder or treason or the like, a defendant needed to either kill or disable their attacker, or survive until sundown, at which point he or she would be considered innocent. That's right, she, because while most places excused women from trials by combat, not all did. It wasn't just women who were excused though. Children, the old, and the infirm were typically granted a pass, with trial by jury being the replacement. Throughout the battle, any of the combatants could cry out "Craven," signaling their defeat, and the trial would end. However, many courts would then invoke outlawry, effectively expelling the individual from the protection of the law and making it perfectly legal to kill or harass them with zero repercussions. As civilization progressed, outcry against trial by combat grew, with most of the citizenry outright despising the concept as early as the 15th century, claiming it only rewards brutes and thugs. Eventually, trial by combat was replaced by the much more progressive trial by jury, though amongst the nobility, trials by combat became gentlemen's duels, which remained popular well into the 19th century before being outlawed in most countries. Want more tips on how to survive trial by combat? Why not check out some of Skillshare's online self-defense classes, like Basics of Kickboxing or Self-Defense for Badass Women. With over 24,000 online classes, Skillshare has the tools you need today to face any trials in your life, whether defending your life in trial to fight to the death or just getting ahead in your career. The first 1,000 people to visit Skillshare.com/infographics35 or to click to see the link in the description will receive a premium membership for 2 months completely free. Join Skillshare and start learning today. The Bible says, "Thou shalt not test the Lord thy God." Why do you think ancient Europeans thought God would really intervene and decide guilt or innocence? Should we have trials by combat today? What would they look like? Let us know by commenting in the notes. Also, be sure to check out our other video, You versus Predator. Could you defeat it? We hope you've enjoyed this episode of the Infographics Show. Please remember to like, share, and subscribe. See you next time.